This episode of The Edge is brought to you by Audible.com, offering more than 180,000 titles for smartphone, tablet, and desktop. To get a free audiobook of your choice and help Trek.fm at the same time, visit audibletrial.com/trekfm. And also by Enterprise in Space, an international program of the nonprofit National Space Society. Find out how you can help science and education and become a virtual crew member aboard the NSS Enterprise Orbiter by visiting enterpriseinspace.org. And if you want to join the conversation and share your thoughts on this episode, join the Babel Conference, our listeners group on Facebook. Just type BABEL into the Facebook search field. We look forward to seeing you there.
You're listening to Trek FM.
What have you done out there on the edge of Federation space?
Welcome, everyone, to Notes from the Edge, a sub-show of our Star Trek Discovery podcast, The Edge. I'm C Bryan Jones, or Chris, and I'll be your host as we flip through the pages of our notebook. In Notes from the Edge, we'll explore connections between Discovery and the greater Star Trek universe, which includes the prior 6 TV series and 13 films, as well as the massive literary universe, because there are elements from there that are being worked into the series. In fact, the writer of the episode we'll talk about today is one of the great Star Trek novelists, Kirsten Beyer, who has continued the Voyager series. We'll also delve deeper into some of the ideas that are unique to Discovery. I kick off each episode of Notes with my thoughts on the latest episode of Discovery, which this time means Vis Pacem para Bellum. Like last episode, there weren't as many connections to explore compared with the early episodes of Discovery, but I will touch on a few, and altogether I'll cover 7 main points today: the tone and structure of the story, Saru, L'Rell, Ash Voqlar, the Gagarin and ships, stardates, and General Order 1, also known as the Prime Directive, which will be the main focus of the notes section. Let's start off with thoughts about the episode. The reaction I've seen online has largely been that this episode was underwhelming compared with the first 7. I've seen some people who absolutely love it, but they seem to be in the minority. And I must admit that I too was underwhelmed on first viewing. As with the previous episodes, there is a lot packed in here, and this one's actually shorter than most, coming in at 41 minutes. That makes it just 2 minutes longer than the previous shortest, which was Battle at the Binary Stars. So I knew that I needed to watch it again before making any comments. I'm not one of those fans who runs to social media to share my first impressions. On my second viewing, a few days later, I found that I liked it more, and on my third viewing, it settled in further. But I can certainly see why it hasn't connected with some fans of Discovery as well as the prior stories. And here I am talking about people who like the show, not the naysayers, but yet this episode for them was not as strong as the others. Coming off the very fun and dramatic magic to make the sanest man go mad probably contributed to this feeling for many. What we have here is an episode that is much more in line with Star Trek of the past than with stories such as Context is for Kings, The Butcher's Knife, and Lethe. Each week I hear fans say, "This was the most Star Trek episode yet." And I always think, well, can it always be more Star Trek week after week? But I think that shows that people are looking for episodes that feel a bit more familiar to what they've watched in the past. And in this case, I would agree. This does feel like the most Star Trek episode yet. But I think that is also part of the reason for the muted reaction to Vis Pacem para Bellum. Although there are some Discovery-specific aspects here, like Saru's ever-present fear, the spore drive, and the burgeoning relationship between Burnham and Tyler, overall I feel that this story could be told on any of the previous Star Trek series. Just change the framing of the story a bit to fit with what's going on in the show at that time and slot in different characters, and it works. We've seen this story before. It feels very Star Trek. It feels very much like a Star Trek novel, in fact, which comes as no surprise since it was written by our friend Kirsten Beyer. Personally, I have no problem with that. It's through episodes like this one that we learn about our characters, build their dossier, nurture relationships, and dangle the threads of future stories. And if we're going to complain that Discovery is doing things differently, and that we want something more like the Star Trek that we're used to, then we can't complain on the flip side when that's what they give us. One thing I liked about this episode, and which is part of that novel feel, is that the bridge crew got a little more to do. The captain addressed them by name, and Arium was even left in command. I've been feeling a bit like these characters are just there to sit on the bridge and aren't really part of the story. I know we did see a few of them in Magic in the party, but it feels like they haven't had much to do. So it was nice to see them have a bit more to do, even if it was still brief. And I hope we see more of that. While we're on the subject of characters who don't play a big role in this episode's A story, let's talk about Stamets and the Spore Drive. We finally got to see exactly how it all works with him in the chamber. And my thought when I saw it was, this is why we need to watch the season play out before getting worked up about this or that aspect of the story. Now, what do I mean by that? After Lethe, I thought it was quite clear that Stamets had taken the place of the tardigrade because of the way he was acting when talking to Lorca and Burnham. He was high on mushrooms. But I saw that some fans didn't pick up on that. And then I thought it was even more clear in Magic, based on how he was acting at the start, to say nothing of the interface that Dr. Culber made for him. I think the interface made it clear for everyone, but still we had not seen it in action. Now we have, so we have to remember that this is one long story that the writers are telling, and we aren't going to get everything at once. Let's take that in another direction. Admiral Cornwell. Following this episode, some have asked if she is still alive or if she is dead. My reading is that she is still alive. I heard that it was said on After Trek, because I don't get to watch that here right now, that she is indeed dead. I don't know what is actually true, but why would you say that on After Trek? It kind of spoils it for the viewer, if that's the case. Now, they could have been speaking ahead of this episode about events to come, or they could be trying to misdirect us. I'm sure you remember when Benedict Cumberbatch said in an interview that he had no idea who Khan was. After my first viewing, I thought that I recalled her moving a bit after L'Rell left the room. I saw on subsequent viewings, I've watched it 4 times now, that this isn't the case. And I think that highlights why we shouldn't run to share our thoughts after going through it only one time, because there's so much packed in these episodes. And our memories are not as good as we think they are most of the time. I know mine isn't. But still, I don't really think they would just leave it with her being dragged into a room and left there. I feel like we're going to get at least a little bit more of her. I also don't think that she is the character Lethe from Dagger of the Mind. I think she will be a casualty in this storyline, but I don't think this is the end of her yet. Again, we have to wait and see. So here's a question. Why do we have Discovery theories? Why are we so impatient 8 episodes in, and really from the first episode, if we're being honest? I've been thinking a lot about this and how fans have been reacting to Discovery in general, and I've come to a hypothesis. We are so used to discussing Star Trek in great detail, focusing on series, episodes, and movies that were all created long ago. We have the whole story. We know how it starts, and we know how it ends. We know everything that happened in between. We're not used to watching Star Trek without knowing where it is going. And we're not used to discussing Star Trek as it unfolds. And we don't know how to do it when we don't have all the information. We are used to analyzing it and fitting the pieces together. And by we, I mean Star Trek fans. I've spent well over 1,000 hours breaking down Star Trek in great detail here on mic over the past 7 years. So with Discovery, we're trying to get ahead of the writers and make what we are seeing fit neatly into the massive story we already know. This is why we have theories such as Admiral Cornwell being Lethe from Dagger of the Mind, or Lorca being from the Mirror Universe, or L'Rell's comment, "At least you won't die in a cage, Admiral," being a reference to the original Star Trek pilot, The Cage. And I'm certain that that last one is not the case. Because we are so accustomed to having a history book of Star Trek written at the end of the story at our fingertips, we think that everything we see must in that moment fit in. We don't consider waiting for the writers to tell the full story, or that what is to come will play a part in reconciling perceived inconsistencies. That's just a thought that has come to my mind as I read more and more comments about Discovery, comments that often leave me scratching my head and sometimes feeling frustrated that some of my fellow fans are so impatient and harsh toward the object of their own fandom. We need to have more patience and go along for the ride. Let's see where it takes us. And at the end, if things don't fit together, well, then we can be upset about it. I won't be upset because, for me, it's about creating new things, but I know some fans will be, and that's fine. I've said it before, and I'll say it again. Discovery, unlike past series, is a book. When we read a novel, we don't expect to know or understand everything in Chapter 8. If we did, what would be the point of reading the book? Think of these episodes as chapters. Then it becomes unnecessary to be frustrated because you don't understand why Saru is the first officer, or why, in my case, Tilly seems pointless as a character in Chapter 3. Subsequent chapters make things clearer, and we feel differently when we have more information. Speaking of theories, I'd like to update you on my theory that Ash Tyler is Voq. Of course, I know this is a widespread theory, not just my theory, but I've talked about it extensively on Mike. So, I still think he is Voq. But I am convinced that he doesn't know that he is Voq. He very clearly thinks that he is a human Starfleet officer from Seattle.
When all this fighting is over, I got big plans. I know of a place, Lake Shasta. Take a little sailboat on the water. Lake's full of trout this time of year. Ever have fresh roasted trout?
I haven't. What?
It's actual heaven. I'll camp on the beach. Watch the stars fall.
That isn't someone pretending. And we see him on a medical bed at the end of this episode. So he has definitely been scanned, probably many times by the doctors. There's even a display above his head showing his internal scan and vital signs. So he must appear human inside and out. I don't know what they are doing, but there are so many hints that he is Voq. Some are subtle, such as L'Rell mentioning him to Cornwell, not by name, and how he is gone forever.
I wish to defect. There's nothing here for me now. The Batak my people now follow has no honor. It is because of Cole I am alone. I had like-minded brothers and sisters. Even the one chosen by Lord D'Kuvma to be his successor. But he was chased away. Forever gone. Everyone is gone.
Some are obvious and seem to be written to prick up your ears with aha, only to be followed by, oh, I thought he was going to say. An example in Vis Pacem Bellum is when he tells Saru that he doesn't know how to adjust.
Commander, can I ask you something? When we first came here, the sounds of this place, you said were like a physical assault. What changed?
I believe I was the problem. I did not understand what I was perceiving. I was not yet in harmony. The Pavans helped me.
Sounds like you were fighting something, then you just stopped.
Yes.
I don't know how to do that.
What is it you are fighting?
And after this, in the way that he looks away and ponders, and then Saru hands him the stone and he touches it, and Saru says that you're hiding something, you're being deceitful. even that seems designed to make us think, aha, he's been busted, as Vok, the Klingon, only we find out that's not what's going on here. So I really feel like the writers are dropping in lots of little hints to keep us moving along. And what's interesting there is that this stuff was all written and mostly filmed before any of us fans saw the story and started coming up with this theory, which means that if they are indeed dropping hints to try to throw us off or make us think that he's Vok, then they certainly anticipated that we would think that, and they've written it into the story. So it's going to be very interesting to see where it goes. Maybe Ash Tyler really is the human they captured, and the Mokai have put Vok's memories or consciousness or neural imprint, whatever you want to call it, into Tyler's body instead of the other way around, which is what many of us have been thinking. But it's suppressed, and Tyler just occasionally feels that something isn't right, maybe only for a second, which could explain some of the looks that he gives, some of the pauses, some of those moments that make you think that it's Vok trying to pretend to be human, when in fact it's clear that Tyler thinks he's human completely. And if they've done this, then at some point the Klingons will send a signal that triggers Vok's essence to take over Tyler, suppressing the human side. It seems that L'Rell knows something, though. I took her comment in this episode as a clue. Maybe she knows that Vok, as a physical being, is gone, but that his life force lives on aboard Discovery. Remember that the House of T'Kuvma believes in spirits after death. I don't really buy her story about wanting to defect. That's a ruse. She wants to get aboard Discovery for some reason. It could be as simple as wanting to gain access to the spore drive and bring the technology back to Cole. But it could be to carry out the next part of the Ash Voqlar plan. After all, she is the one who took him to the Mokai. But as I said a moment ago, we'll have to wait for the next chapters to find out. I guess I should talk about Saru a bit, since this was basically a Saru episode. I don't have as much to say as I thought I would, but I'll address some comments that I have seen from viewers who really did not like Saru in this episode and said that he is a bore or a snooze. Comments like that really disappoint me when they come from Star Trek fans, because Kirsten is trying to explore an aspect of not only Saru's character, but of many people who find difficulties in life. One of the messages of Star Trek, one of the things that I think it should teach us after we've watched as many hours of it as anyone listening to a Star Trek podcast has no doubt watched, is that different people have different struggles. Understanding those people and trying to see the world through their eyes is important. Ignoring the views of others, how they see the world, what causes them hardship, is one reason our society is in such turmoil right now. Now, that may seem a bit extreme, but in the case of this episode, try to imagine what it would be like to live in constant fear. And think how much strength and bravery it must take Saru to serve in Starfleet.
I lied to you. I'm Lieutenant Tyler. I attacked you. I could have killed you.
You weren't yourself.
But I was. We are born afraid. We Kelpians. It's how we survive. As such, my whole life, I have never known a moment without fear. The freedom of it. Not one moment. Until Pavo.
Regardless of what you think of him, he would not have risen to the position of First Officer of the Discovery if he weren't a capable officer. While I've never been chased by an apex predator, and I can't reach speeds of 80 kilometers per hour, I have spent more than a year now constantly worried about health. It's debilitating. It's ever present in my life. It controls so much of what I do. And like Saru and Burnham, I would love to have just a moment of peace. So I understand where he's coming from, even if the situation is different. I would agree that this wasn't the most riveting episode, and on a single viewing, you might not find the Saru story that interesting. But if you really listen to what he is saying and imagine what it would be like to live that life, there's a lot to be had here, just as there has been in numerous episodes of past Star Trek, episodes fans consider to be among the best. I think this is a story that the writers will build upon when it comes to Saru. It explored important aspects of his character that will make future stories possible, and as I always say, I think Doug Jones is doing an amazing job with this character. To convey the emotion that he does through all that makeup is no small feat. I'm really impressed. I sometimes just marvel at the screen when I see the nuance in his performance. All right, let's move on to notes. Let's start off with language and talk about the title, Vis Pacem para Bellum, which means, if you want peace, prepare for war. 2 episodes ago, we had a title that was a name from Greek mythology, Lethe. This time around, we delve into Latin. Trivia here. Counting this one, there are 9 episodes of Star Trek with Latin titles. Can you name them? I'll give you a hint. Besides this Discovery episode, 1 is from The Next Generation, 2 are from Deep Space Nine, 3 are from Voyager, and 2 are from Enterprise. I'll give you a moment. All right, the TNG episode is everyone's favorite ghost story, Sub Rosa. This literally means under the rose, but is used in Latin to denote secrecy. The DS9 episodes are Dramatis Personae, which means the characters are actors in a drama, Inter Arma Enim Silent Legis, which translated into normal English means in times of war, the law falls silent. The Voyager episodes are Ex Post Facto, which means after the fact. Non Sequitur, which means it doesn't follow, or in other words, in storytelling, a conclusion that doesn't follow the premise. The way what happened to Harry Kim in that episode was very disjointed. Alter Ego, which means other self, and which of course has become a common term in English, alter ego. And the Enterprise episodes are Terra Nova, which means New Earth, and Vox Sola, which means lone voice. So there you go, just a bit of trivia to start off notes. Now let's go to some other names, not names of episodes, but names of ships. These are the ships that we hear about at the beginning of this episode. The ship we see being attacked by the Klingons, which was a really cool design by the way, is the USS Gagarin, NCC 1309. This is almost certainly named after Yuri Gagarin, the Soviet cosmonaut who in 1961 became the first man to travel into space. He flew aboard the Vostok 1. Vostok means east in Russian. He flew at an altitude of 301 kilometers, or 187 miles, and took an hour and 29 minutes to complete an orbit of the Earth. For his groundbreaking flight, he was awarded the Order of Lenin and given the titles of Hero of the Soviet Union and Pilot Cosmonaut of the Soviet Union. Across the country, streets were renamed for him, and the city where he was born in 1934, Gzhatsk, is now called Gagarin. Gagarin died on March 27, 1968, the same year that Captain John Christopher was stationed at the command headquarters of the 498th Air Base in Nebraska, and Agents 201 and 347 were killed in a car crash, forcing Gary 7 to assume their mission to stop the launch of an orbital nuclear weapons platform from McKinley Rocket Base. But Discovery isn't the first to pay tribute to the space pioneer. Previously in Star Trek, in The Next Generation, another starship was named for him. The USS Yuri Gagarin, NCC 25306, appeared on an okudogram in The Measure of a Man, and was assigned to patrol the neutral zone in Sector 142. This ship is also referenced in Brad Ferguson's TOS novel, Crisis of Centaurus, from 1986, which predates the TNG reference by 2.5 years. There's also the VK Yuri Gagarin, a DY-732 class colony ship, which I hope doesn't stand for do-it-yourself, because I don't want to fly in that. This ship, which was of United Nations registry, was in service in the 22nd century and was listed on a display that Picard was reviewing in the second season episode Up the Long Ladder. The captain of this ship, by the way, was Winrich Colby, named, of course, after the prolific Star Trek director. There was also an Oberth-class starship named the USS Gagarin in the 23rd century that appeared in the FASA role-playing game module Starship Tactical Combat Simulator. But these 4 ships aren't the only references to Gagarin in Star Trek. In the second season TNG episode Unnatural Selection, the Darwin Genetic Research Station is located on Gagarin 4, which is, as you would expect, in the Gagarin system. This planet was named after the Soviet cosmonaut, according to Mike and Denise Okuda's Star Trek Encyclopedia. Gagarin 4 also appeared in the Decipher RPG module, Worlds. And there's also a radiation belt named after Gagarin. It surrounds the Larakas system and appears in the first season Enterprise episode Strange New World and the film Star Trek Beyond. That's where the USS Franklin went missing. And Yuri Gagarin himself is mentioned in David R. George III's Deep Space Nine novel Ascendance. So there's a lot of Gagarin in Star Trek, as you would expect there to be. As for the other ships, I won't cover the Hoover because it isn't clear where the name comes from. It could be that the ship was powered by a special propulsion system that sucked matter from the surrounding space, making that region cleaner. Or it could be named after Hoover, a suburb of Birmingham, Alabama, that neighbored the one in which I grew up in, Bellum. We always said it sucked too. The USS Muroc, however, was probably named after the Vulcan High Command member who served during the 22nd century and appeared in the second season Enterprise episode Ceasefire, and in Christopher L. Bennett's Department of Temporal Investigations novel Forgotten History, we learn that the Vulcan High Command ship VHC Muroc was named after him. One other quick thing I want to mention is the stardate, because this really caught my attention. Since TNG, we've grown accustomed to stardates moving us forward consistently through time, like a calendar. But this episode does something that TOS did, and it's a bit puzzling in this case. The stardates in the original series are a bit all over the place, and we had a little out-of-order thing going here, too. So looking at the original series, and looking in the order of production, Where No Man Has Gone Before takes place on stardate 1312.4. The Corbomite Maneuver takes place on stardate 1512.2. But then Mudd's Women is 1329.8. The Enemy Within, 1672.1, followed by The Man Trap on 1513.1. And if we jump ahead, still in Season 1, there's Balance of Terror on stardate 1709.2, followed by What Are Little Girls Made Of on stardate 2712.4. Then a bit later, Shore Leave is on 3025.3, followed immediately by The Squire of Gothos on 2124.5. So we're just all over the place. And if you reorder these by air date, it doesn't get any better. In fact, it even gets more random. I've always chalked it up to being a new show with no rules for how the stardate would work. And it's fine, and I don't think much about it. Different writers just picked a number, and there wasn't the kind of consistency check that you would get today. But again, today, you would be making sure that everything lines up and makes sense. So I was really surprised when Burnham started recording her log and said that the stardate was 1308.9, because in the last episode, Mudd said that the stardate was 2136.8, way after this episode. So a stardate of 1308.9 would put it after the cage, although the stardate for that episode is unknown, but we do know that it takes place 2 years before these stories. It would also put it just barely before where no man has gone before, which was 1312.4. But it also puts it well before the previous episode of Discovery, Magic to Make the Sanest Man Go Mad. If we run down what we have for this series so far, there's the Vulcan Hello, Stardate 1207.3, Battle at the Binary Stars, also 1207.3. Context is for Kings. The stardate is unknown, but it is stated that it's 6 months later after the pilot. The Butcher's Knife Cares Not for the Lamb's Cry. Stardate is unknown. Choose Your Pain. Again, stardate unknown, but 3 weeks after Context, because Lorca talks about the battles that have happened since Context is for Kings. Lethe, the stardate is unknown, but it's the same month as Choose Your Pain. And then Magic to Make the Sanest Man Go Mad, which is stardate 2136.8. And now, Vis Pacem Parabellum 1308.9. So, maybe it isn't this episode that is out of place at all, even though it's the one that caught my eye, but rather the previous one. 1308.9 seems about right in line with the progression from 1207.3 in the pilot. Assuming that Into the Forest I Go is the same stardate as this story, as the second part of this cliffhanger, we'll just have to wait until January 7th to find out if Despite Yourself and the remaining Season 1 episodes are linear or random. I think they're going to be linear. I think something weird had just happened with Magic. I'm surprised that got by everybody. But considering that everything else seems to line up, that seems to be an outlier. And I hope they'll pay more attention in the future to avoid things like that. But yeah, Burnham's log immediately caught my attention, coming off of last week's muddy adventure. All right, so enough with all of those numbers. Sorry to confuse you there. I'm sure that was not very pleasant to listen to, but hopefully you found it interesting. Let's move on.
Doctor?
Captain?
I'm going down to the Valachian hospital.
Sir? It would go against all my principles if I didn't ask you to reconsider what...
I have reconsidered. I spent the whole night reconsidering. And what I've decided goes against all my principles. Someday, my people are going to come up with some sort of a doctrine. Something that tells us what we can and can't do out here. Should and shouldn't do. But until somebody tells me that they've drafted that directive, I'm going to have to remind myself every day that we didn't come out here to play God.
When Jonathan Archer spoke those words, there was no Prime Directive, or General Order 1. But at that moment in the first season episode, Dear Doctor, he realized that humans were going to need some sort of guiding principle out there in deep space to avoid harming other cultures. The Prime Directive, sometimes called the Non-Interference Directive, has changed a lot over the years as different writers tack on different meanings to fit the needs of their stories. So when Burnham explains it in this episode, I was initially taken aback. That's not what General Order 1 means, I thought. Or at least that's not all that it means. But then again, maybe at this point in time, that is all that it means. Like when Cornwell tells L'Rell that the Federation has no death penalty. We all know that visiting Talos 4 will get you the death penalty in 2267. But that's a decade after where we are right now. In 2256, even though it's 2 years after the cage, that death penalty may not yet be law. It can be difficult with a prequel to keep your mind in that time period. And we also know that by the 24th century, that death penalty for visiting Talos 4 is gone, and there once again is no death penalty. So things change. General Order 1 was first mentioned on screen in Miri, the 8th episode of the original series to air, although it wasn't mentioned by name, only by principle that they shouldn't interfere. The first time it was referred to as the Prime Directive was 13 episodes later in The Return of the Archons. By the time we get to the end of Voyager, there are 47, yeah, I know, it's convenient, right? Suborders to General Order 1. And the Prime Directive is mentioned 69 times prior to Discovery, which is probably a lot fewer than you thought. Before I mention some of those suborders, here's how Kirk described it in the original series, in the Omega Glory.
Captain's log, supplemental. The Enterprise has left the Exeter and has moved into close planet orbit. Although it appears the infection may strand us here the rest of our lives, I face an even more difficult problem. A growing belief that Captain Tracy has been interfering with the evolution of life on this planet. It seems impossible. The Star Captain's most solemn oath is that he will give his life, even his entire crew, rather than violate the Prime Directive.
And here's how Picard explained it early in The Next Generation, in the first season episode Symbiosis.
Beverly, the Prime Directive is not just a set of rules. It is a philosophy, and a very correct one. History has proved again and again that whenever mankind interferes with a less developed civilization, no matter how well-intentioned that interference may be, the results are invariably disastrous.
Picard's description sets up why there must be so many suborders, but even it doesn't tell the whole story. A society need not be lacking in warp capability for our crews to be subject to the Prime Directive. It is, after all, a non-interference directive. And so some of the suborders include providing knowledge of other inhabited worlds, and this includes sharing such information even if there are those in that society who already know. This is what happens in the TNG episode, First Contact. The government knows, but the people don't. Providing knowledge of technologies or science. This one has been broken by the Voyager crew so many times that I've lost count, but let's be honest, all crews have played fast and loose with this one. Taking actions to generally affect a society's overall development. Again, this has happened over and over in Star Trek. Even diverting an asteroid that might strike an inhabited planet would be a violation under a strict interpretation, which is actually covered by a specific suborder, which is helping a society escape a natural disaster known to the society, even if inaction would result in a society's extinction. Okay, so in this one, maybe it would be okay if the society didn't know about the impending disaster. But wouldn't that still be changing the natural course of that society's development? It's really a gray area, right? As so many of these are. Another one is taking actions which support one faction within a society over another. Also violated many times. And you could argue that the entirety of Deep Space Nine was a violation of this suborder. We also have helping a society escape the negative consequences of its own actions. Again, kind of hard to avoid in storytelling. Subverting or avoiding the application of a society's laws. Don't jump in the flowers, Wesley. Don't put your captain in this position. But of course, we've seen this happen many times too. And one more I'll mention is interfering in the internal affairs of a society. Okay, yeah. Starfleet crews have never done that, right? So, yeah, it's way more complicated than what Burnham described. Maybe in 2256 it was still very simple. Warp drive equals okay, no warp drive equals no. By the letter of the law, that is. But by the spirit of the guiding principle, many of the items I listed above would apply. My own interpretation, my headcanon, as I've been calling it since the start of Trek FM in 2010, is that this order applies mainly to non-Federation worlds and non-Federation protectorates. This is why I don't consider the actions of Sisko or the Federation in Deep Space Nine to be a violation, even though you could read the suborders that way. The Bajorans invited the Federation to have a presence there and to help them. I think of this more as applying to non-Federation worlds, usually with less advanced technology, but not necessarily without warp capability. Trying to apply definitive meaning or consistency to the Prime Directive is a hopeless cause. It always has been and always will be adapted to the needs of the story by the writer. And in real life, it would have to be a malleable rule because diversity would always be forcing interpretation. But at the end of the day, it forces crews to stop and think before they take action that could be detrimental. So maybe we need a Prime Directive in our own world. All right, so those are my notes from The Edge for Week 8 of Star Trek Discovery. Be sure to check out our Discovery coverage throughout the week. On Monday nights at 9 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Pacific, Brandy and Bruce go live on YouTube with Live from The Edge, and you can take part in the show by interacting with them on Twitter or through chat. And we've got one more week of that before the break. And if you can't join live, you can still listen to the show on Tuesday morning when it is released as a podcast. We have commentary tracks for you on Wednesdays. Those are brought to you by Mike Schindler as tracks from The Edge. And we also discuss your feedback on postcards from The Edge on Thursday with Amy Nelson. And of course, you can catch full analysis on The Edge main show on Fridays. That involves many of our hosts. And I'll be wrapping things up each week here on Notes from The Edge on Saturdays or Sundays, depending on my schedule, with this kind of deep dive into the links between Discovery and the broader franchise that we did today. You'll find all of these in the main feed for The Edge and also in the Trek FM master feed, which, by the way, is a great way to sample all the different shows that we have here on the network. We'd love to hear your thoughts on Discovery and on Vis Pacem Bellum. The best place to do that is the Babel Conference, our listeners group on Facebook, where Amy Nelson will be collecting all your feedback for postcards from The Edge. Just type Babel, B-A-B-E-L, into the search field on Facebook, and it should come right up. It is a closed group, so if you're not a member, you need to click join, and then someone will let you in. You can also find us on Twitter. Our username is TrekFM, or send us email using the contact form on our website at trek.fm/contact. Choose to send to a show and choose The Edge, and that will come to all The Edge hosts by email. And if you'd like to find me personally, you can find me there in the Babel Conference, of course. There will be a post for this episode of Notes if you'd like to comment on the things I talked about. But perhaps the best place to converse with me is on Twitter. That's where I'm most active. My username is C Bryan Jones, letter C, and Bryan with a Y. And that's my name pretty much everywhere in social media. If you'd like to hear me discuss Star Trek Beyond Discovery, you can catch me on my main show, The Ready Room. And I also co-host The Orb, our Deep Space Nine podcast with Matthew Rushing. You'll also hear me on lots of older episodes from various shows. If you dig deep into the catalog, I created a lot of the early ones and hosted many of them, about 7 a week, in fact. And you can also find my writing about Star Trek on the official website at startrek.com. I'd like to take a moment and thank our associate producers of The Edge, Norman C. Lowell, Tony Robinson, Lisa Slack, Tom Puleo, Shoei Mirza, and Richard Rutledge. Thank you so much, guys, for your support. It is thanks to you that we're able to keep this show going. We had a huge month in October, nearly 10 terabytes of data. That's a lot of bandwidth, so it does cost us quite a lot to produce, host, and distribute these shows. So all the support that you can give us is most appreciated. I really do thank you for it. And if you'd like to help us keep all of our shows going and even become an associate producer, join us on the Patrons Roundtable to talk Star Trek with fellow listeners and some of our hosts. Get access to Patron Zone, which is our special website. You can find out everything that you need to know at patreon.com/trekfm. That's patreon.com/trekfm. All the details you need are right over there. And again, I really do thank everyone who supports us so very much. Thank you, guys. Well, that's all I have for you this time. Thank you so much for listening. Sorry again about all the numbers in the Stardate section. maybe that wasn't such a good idea after all, but again, I hope you found it interesting and informative. And I hope you'll join me again next time as we jot down more notes right on the paper's edge.